If you have been listening to this weekly podcast series here, then you already know how much I detest censorship, especially in music and book burnings, etc., etc. You also know that I usually do not get too political on here unless music and politics end up colliding with each other. After all, you've got tons of politics podcasts out there. Everybody wants to spout their opinion off about something or other. This isn't the place for that. However, a couple of months ago on this podcast, I told you about the 2 Live crew being arrested and tried on obscenity charges for their song, Me So Horny, and a record store owner being arrested and tried for selling a minor the 2 Live Crew's album As Nasty As They Wanna Be in Florida. This week in music history, the event that brought about those events took place, and also started my extreme hatred of music censorship. Oh, and I should also note before I start up that for the record, I am neither a Republican or Democrat. I am a registered moderate independent. So I'm not going to bend this story in either direction because honestly, both political parties were at fault on this one. As with everything having to do with music history, you have to put it into the context of its times. Back in the 1980s, conservatism was king. Ronald Reagan was president, and far-right Christian conservative groups like the Moral Majority had their say with policies in the United States. Even the Democrats were basically conservative light, let's say, except for standouts like Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts. One day, Democrat Tipper Gore, the wife of then United States Democratic Senator, eventual Democratic Vice President, father of the Earth, and inventor of the Internet, Al Gore. I say father of the Earth and inventor of the Internet sarcastically because that's what he said he was. Anyway, Tipper was listening to the radio with her kids when the song Darling Nikki from Prince came on, from, of course, the 1984 film Purple Rain, and the classic album that came from it. Tipper was appalled, and of course, being the wife of the senator, she decided to use her power and political connections as the wife of a senator to do something about all that filth on the radio. I mean, it's just nasty. She, along with Republican Treasury Secretary James Baker's wife, Susan Baker, Washington, D.C. power realtor Raymond Hauer's wife, Pam Hauer, and Washington, D.C. City Council Chairman John Sivius's wife, Sally Sivius, they all founded a group called the Parents Music Resource Center, or PMRC for short. This was back in May of 1985. This group received support not only from conservatives, but also liberals, or at least so-called liberals at the time. In the end, 22 people joined their organization. They also received financial support from Coors Beer's owner, Joseph Coors, who also gave them offices at one of his buildings to work out of. Strangely, or maybe not so strangely, they also received financial support from musicians. Among them was lead singer Mike Love of the Beach Boys, whose group only 2 years earlier was banned from performing on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. by then Secretary of the Interior, and brilliant dude that he was, James Watts, because, according to Watts, the Beach Boys would attract, quote, the wrong element, end quote, to the mall. If you ever needed another reason to not like Mike Love, let his support for censorship of other artists be it, the hypocrite that he was, and still is actually. Anyway, the main objectives of the PMRC was to make the record labels put parental advisory labels on anything that the PMRC deemed offensive, to have those records sold from behind the counter, or worse, to not have them sold at all, as Walmart eventually did, to make TV stations not play the music videos from those songs, and to pressure record labels to, quote, reassess the contracts of musicians who performed violently or sexually in concert, end quote. In other words, to cancel them. to deprive these artists, whichever artists, Christian groups, and others judged as acting in this manner, of making a living. Think of it as official censorship and cancel culture all rolled up into one. See, kids? When I say that cancel culture has been going on for decades, I really do mean that cancel culture has been going on for decades. And yes, both Republicans and Democrats do it. There's your unity speech for this week. Let's move on. To start the process off, the PMRC put pressure on the record labels to put out a rating system for music, much like movies had. Then, the group put out a list of songs called the Filthy 15, which were 15 songs that they thought were obscene. The songs, which they didn't like because of sexual content, were Prince's, of course, Darling Nikki, Sheena Easton's Sugar Walls, which coincidentally was written by Prince, Judas Priest's Eat Me Alive, Vanity's Strap-On Robbie Baby, AC/DC's Let Me Put My Love Into You, Madonna's Dress You Up, okay, whatever, Wasp's Animal, Cyndi Lauper's She Bop, and the Mary Jane Girls with In My House. Songs dealing with violence were Motley Crue's Bastard and Twisted Sister's We're Not Gonna Take It. Def Leppard's High and Dry and Black Sabbath's Trashed made the list because of, drug and alcohol use. Songs that dealt with the occult were Merciful Fate's Into the Coven and Venom's Possessed. Why no rap music, you say? Well, that's simple. Rap didn't hit the mainstream at that point. In fact, it wouldn't hit the mainstream in full force until the next couple of years when Run DMC and the Beastie Boys broke through. Otherwise, I am pretty sure that rap music would have been included in this little censorship party of theirs. The record labels caved to the pressure in August of 1985 and announced that they were going to put parental advisory stickers on albums. That wasn't good enough for the PMRC. They wanted a Senate hearing on the matter. On September 19th, 1985, the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee convened a hearing to discuss the songs. Al Gore and a bunch of other senators gave their opening remarks to show America that they were going to take this scourge of music very seriously. So seriously that most of them left the hearing once they were done listening to their own voices to attend to other business. Then the testimony began. Testifying for the group first was Senator Paula Hawkins, who showed album covers to Def Leppard's Pyromania, Wendy O. Williams' WOW, and Wasp's self-titled album, along with showing the music videos to Twisted Sister's We're Not Gonna Take It and Van Halen's Hot for Teacher. Senator Hawkins' famous line from her testimony was, quote, "Much has changed since Elvis's seemingly innocent times. Subtleties, suggestions, and innuendo have given way to overt expressions and descriptions of often violent sexual acts, drug-taking, and flirtations with the occult. The record album covers, to me, are self-explanatory." End quote. All right, that's not really her accent, but whatever. Who cares? I guess, actually, that no one ever told her how Elvis Presley had died 8 years earlier, but whatever. Pretty sure it wasn't because he was listening to psychedelic rock music, by the way. Next, Susan Baker testified. During her testimony, Baker said, quote, and no, I'm not going to do an accent here, "There certainly are many causes for these ills in our society, but it is our contention that the pervasive messages aimed at children which promote and glorify such things that can't be mentioned here have to be numbered among the contributing factors." End quote. I had to paraphrase part of that because she actually mentioned those unmentionable things. During her testimony, Tipper Gore said that she wanted the record labels to voluntarily put a warning label on music and or videos that were deemed inappropriate for younger children. The problem with her statement was that record labels had already agreed to that a month earlier. So this was really just a political dog and pony show during this hearing. During her testimony, National PTA, that's Parents Teachers Association, Vice President of Legislative Activity, Miss Millie Waterman, said that maybe the label should put a letter R on albums for restricted and provide lyric sheets for the albums. Okay, those were called liner notes and could already be found if you even bothered to open up a CD or album sleeve, but whatever. Then the quote-unquote real experts testified. Music professor Dr. Joe Stussy of the University of Texas at San Antonio apparently had it in for heavy metal music. He said that heavy metal was different from other forms of music like early rock and roll and jazz music because it, quote, had as one of its central elements the element of hatred, end quote. Child psychologist Dr. Paul King said that heavy metal was a religion. Well, okay. And that a lot of children read deeply into song lyrics. I can't actually argue with that guy because, as we all know, music is life. That's why we do these podcasts. And yeah, it is a religion. Sure, let's go with that. Why not? Arguing for music were a bunch of guys who you would have never pictured in a million years being in the same room together. But there they were. Frank Zappa, soft rock crooner John Denver, and Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, who had that song make the Filthy 15 list. Frank Zappa said, quote, "The PMRC proposal is an ill-conceived piece of nonsense which fails to deliver any real benefits to children, infringes the civil liberties of people who are not children, and promises to keep the courts busy for years dealing with the interpretation and enforcement problems inherent in the proposal's design," end quote. He also said that he thought that this whole thing was probably a way to get the blank tape tax bill that the record labels wanted at the time, that was bill number HR 2911, to get through Congress pretty quickly. Dee Snider said that his music had been misinterpreted. For instance, the group song Under the Blade was actually about one of the bandmates' surgery and wasn't any nefarious acting, as Tipper Gore had asserted. As Dee Snider put it, quote, "The only bad things in this song is in the mind of Ms. Gore. Ms. Gore was looking for those bad things and she found it. Someone looking for surgical references would have found it as well. The full responsibility for defending my children falls on the shoulders of my wife and I, because there is no one else capable of making these judgments for us," end quote. And yes, the bad things part was paraphrased as well, because Dee named the bad things that Tipper was looking for. And those wouldn't play on this channel. Anyway. John Denver said that he was against censorship and that at one time, even his song, Rocky Mountain High, had been misinterpreted. He went on to state, quote, "That which is denied becomes that which is most desired, and that which is hidden becomes that which is most interesting. Consequently, a great deal of time and energy is spent trying to get at what is being kept from you," end quote. Zappa and Snider apparently surprised the senators by how articulately they spoke. As Snider later said, quote, "They had no idea I spoke English fluently," end quote. Regardless of the dog and pony show that this hearing was, the PMRC was successful. Well, at least for a time. The record industry did, for a few years, implement most of those things that the PMRC wanted. That, in turn, led to stores not selling certain records, especially large chain stores, which were really powerful in terms of album sales at that point. Think of them as the Spotify in physical form. Those that did sell those albums were faced with obscenity charges if a kid under 18 bought a record somehow. Some record labels instead came up with PG versions of albums and songs with lyrics either changed or replaced completely. Of course, musicians were extremely upset and took it out in song. Danzig's 1988 song, Mother, was about the situation, with the lyrics, "Mother, tell your children not to walk my way. Tell your children not to hear my words, what they mean, what they say, Mother," which ended up actually being Danzig's biggest hit. Great song, by the way. In the end, the one thing that the PMRC wanted, it didn't get: public support. The Supreme Court later said that the particular obscenity charges that involved the 2 Live crew were unconstitutional. Now, the parental advisory sticker is laughed at, and anyone can buy whatever they want, whenever they want, the internet being the great equalizer in all of this. Record labels do still censor artists and release alternative versions of songs, so the ramifications of what happened are still being felt. For instance, Akon's 2006 hit with Snoop Dogg, "I Wanna Love You," was originally titled "I Wanna F You," and you can figure out what the F stood for. This entire sordid chain of events, though, all culminated during that Senate hearing on September 19th, 1985.